The Buckeye State Sheriffs Association is providing this podcast as a public service for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host or guest of this podcast are their own and may not reflect those of the BSSA, employees of the BSSA, or any of its officials. Any reference to a specific product, entity, opinion, issue, or other such item does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation thereof by the BSSA. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association.
You know, to be an effective leader, but still having the compassion of a hometown boy, so easy to do the right thing. You have to deliberately do the bad thing. It's so easy when you do it the right way. And that's always been my philosophy. Let's just do it the right way. It's a lot easier. And it's worked out great.
Welcome to the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association podcast, where we'll introduce sheriffs and deputies across Ohio. During this conversation, you'll get to know the men and women serving you and hear all about the good work being done in the Buckeye State every day. Now let's join your host, Paulding County Sheriff Jason Landers, and today's special guest.
Welcome to the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association podcast. We're here today with Sheriff Vern Stanforth from Fayette County, Ohio. I'm Jason Landers, Sheriff in Paulding County, and the host of today's podcast. Sheriff, it's good to have you on. You're down in the southern part of the state in comparison to me, where I'm up in the northwest corner along the Indiana state line and just a couple counties south of Michigan. How are things going down your way today?
Well, Fayette County is in great shape. A little bit of snow, but that's what we expect in the winter. You know, Fayette County is located in the southwestern quarter of the state, but geographically, we're the center of nothing and the center of everything. You know, you talk about how we're located. You take a 3-hour drive from my community, and you're in Indianapolis, Louisville. You could be almost to Charleston, West Virginia. Almost to Cleveland. So everything is right close by here, and we have some major highways to go through. You know, it's, for a small county, we have a lot of activity here.
Yeah, you are in an interesting part. I just moved my son, Jamie and I did, down east of Cincinnati into Claremont County and for his job, and it's interesting. I'm up here in the flatlands, so folks that have listened to this podcast in the past, I've said just about on every podcast it comes out for some reason or another. The historians say we're the flattest county in the state of Ohio, and it goes back into the black swamp era and the glaciers that come through and level everything out. Nothing but Paulding County clay, they say. You get down your way, which is, for me, it would be just about 3 hours to get down there, and things change in the landscape. Start to get into the hills a little bit, and then maybe just a little bit southeast of you, you start to get into the western side of the Appalachian Mountains, I think, down in that way towards Adams County and such, right?
Yeah, we are at the foot of the Appalachian area. We're not Appalachian. We don't have that designation. Sometimes like to, because we get a lot of extra grant availability through being in Appalachian County. But we're not, but everything flows downhill, of course, and we get some of the residual effects of that area. But, you know, you talk about the glacier. We were very fortunate. The glacier moved everything, leveled off a lot of our county and deposited some great topsoil in Fayette County. We were swampy area once we drained it. In the late 1700s, we started effectively draining our county and populating it. Actually became settled in 1810 formed as a county. And because of that previous drainage, all that swamp area became even more black soil, and we have some great farmland down here. To this day, we still have fantastic farmland because of that.
Well, that's good. I think our founding date was around the 1820 era, so maybe as the glaciers come through, they pushed all of our good stuff when it comes to soil right down south towards you and founded you folks first, and then we came along. Well, Vern, let's get started here as we want to connect you with the community you serve, and we know as we go through the podcast that the folks that maybe don't know you as well or that listen to this podcast for the first time might not know some of these things about you, but I think it's really important when we're serving our communities to learn who's doing doing those things for us. So let's start with, who is Vern Stanforth? Where are you from? Where are you raised? And we'll just kind of wrap that into, kind of how did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up here in Fayette County, very isolated little community, a settlement in the western part of the county. And my dad's philosophy was, you didn't lose anything in town, there's no reason to go there. And so by the time I grew up here, 16 years old, got my driver's license. I still didn't know how to drive to town. Had no clue how to get there. Never came to town. We stayed in our little corner of the county, and that was my world. Very comfortable world that I lived in. I didn't know much about anything. When I was with the high school at Miami Trace High School, which is located just about 2 miles outside of Washington Courthouse, which is the county seat. But I spent all 4 years at the high school, very seldom came to town. Didn't have that option. So Washington Courthouse was even more removed from me. But it was still, I'm part of Fayette County. I've always been here, raised here. My parents were from Greene County, which is next door over in Xenia and Cedarville. And my grandparents were out of the Highland County area. I moved there from Virginia, and we're all southern part of Ohio was all Virginia's descendants, basically, from American Revolution. Fayette County settled as veterans of the American Revolution. That's a lot of their payment, since they didn't get paid as being soldiers, was given in land grants, and Fayette County is part of that land grant. So a lot of our individual history dates back to the Virginia territory and colony, and that's my family as well. But I graduated from high school. Interesting enough, I was so shy as a student. I mean, because I lived a very isolated world. I can't say that we were poor, because I don't think we were. We maybe have been. We had the basic necessities. We grew our own garden. We had, that was just, in those days you did that. You didn't go to town to get this. You didn't go to town to get that. You just, you went to town on very rare occasions. But that was, I had a great life. I mean, as a child, nothing compared to today's activities, but, you went swimming down in the creek, and, you camped out in the woods all summer long, and, you just had those were the good lives. The Tom Sawyer type life was right here for me.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, it's interesting as I grew older, talking to my kids about things like that in the way that, we grew up, to me, in a lot more simple lifestyle than the way kids do today. And again, like, we're proud as parents to be able to provide things to our kids that are keeping them up with the times, I guess you will, with technology and different things. But boy, it was a lot more simple back then, when you could just get with the neighbors and go out into a ditch filled with water and play for hours until your mom called you back in for supper, or go down to the woods and break tree branches and try to create a little fire with some leaves or something. Just different times, that's for sure.
Well, yep. I remember the time we had our first street light put in our community, and when it got dark where I lived. I mean, there was no lights out there. And they finally came in and they put a street light up, and we couldn't. I mean, the residents didn't want it. They said it's just not necessary. But that became our recreation center. So, it used to be when it got dark, you had to go inside. But now we had a street light, so we got to stay outside for an hour after dark just to play under the street light. The nearest town village was 4 miles away. You rode your bike there in the summer just to have something to do. But during the winter, you stayed home, and it was a good life. I can't knock it.
Well, Vern, let's expand on that a little bit as you talk about how you grew up there in Fayette County and talked about your county seat, Washington Courthouse. Let's tell the listeners, if you would, a little bit more about the community you serve, about Fayette County. What kind of what are the towns, villages, or cities like? What kind of industry do you have? What brings people into Fayette County?
Well, for a long time, nothing brought them in. It was what was taking them out. Fayette County has been basically a rural agricultural county, nestled. We're about 40 miles south of Columbus and 45 miles north of Cincinnati and 40 miles east of Dayton and another 30 miles east of Chillicothe, and a lot of crossroads from state routes go here. But we have a population of about 29,000. Again, that's a high population for us. That's a high number. We're probably closer to 28,500, something like that. And that number doesn't change much, and hasn't changed much for decades and decades. It's stayed about the same. Washington Courthouse is the only city we have. Its population is about 14,000. The rest of the population, of the 14,000, is in the county. We have probably 5 incorporated villages. One's about 700. The other's about 1,000 people. The others we have one that's probably 50 people. We don't have a lot of incorporated areas. No other law enforcement except for Washington Courthouse Police Department. The rest of the county is the sheriff's office provides law enforcement services for all the villages as well as the unincorporated areas, which makes it simple. Not having to deal with a lot of small agencies. We have a very good police department, and they're easy to work with. Always been a pleasant working experience with both agencies. So fortunate in that regard. We're very agricultural. A lot of farmland. We have Valero. We make ethanol. So we have a large ethanol plant because we have a lot of corn production here, even more so now. The other product is soybeans, and that is a lot of our soybeans have been shipped all over the world on a regular basis. So those are the 2 main products that's grown here. Used to be a horse community, and that's kind of gone away a little bit. Those large horse farms have gone away. We have 2 school systems, rural city, the city schools, the Washington Courthouse City Schools, and the Miami Trace school system. Those are the 2 schools, both about equal size. Miami Trace is a little larger, great sports teams historically, especially when I was going to school there. So the community itself is growing. The biggest thing we're seeing here is we have an area near the Interstate 71 and Route 35, and between Route 35 and Route 41 and that interchange. We've had a planned industrial park up there that just has laid dormant for decades. And within a couple of years ago, Honda came looking for land, and Honda and LG is coupled together to make a lithium battery plant, and that plant is under construction now. They're hiring, probably 5,000 people, construction people, and when they move out and actually start production in 2020, somewhere we think in late 2025, they may actually start production. The plant will employ about 2,000 people plus. And because of that, we're looking at some other industry that may be coming through. And the big dynamic change there is our housing is actually, there are no available housing left. So they are building subdivisions, designing subdivisions, and that's going to change the dynamics of our community from a very rural community to an industry-based community. And still mixing the 2 together and make sure that both are served well.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's a lot of people, Vern, to bring in. And I know you talked just a few minutes ago about where you're at in relationship to other cities, but where do you draw in a couple thousand people for new employment? What market or what cities will you pull from?
Well, I said in a meeting when I shortly after I became sheriff, I was sitting in a meeting, and something that was said that struck me, and it's still true today. If you would take a pen and stick it in Washington Courthouse, we're on the map, and stick it in the center of Fayette County, which Washington Courthouse is pretty well centered in the county, and you have a string, and you take that string equal to about a 3-hour drive, and you draw a big circle. Back in the 90s, that circle would housed about 6,000 people. Today, I wouldn't be surprised if that's more like 1 million people, 6 million people. And today, that's probably more, probably 8 million people. We're looking at a 3-hour drive from Washington Courthouse. You have a vast amount of population in the various communities. So it stands to reason that if you have an industry located in Washington Courthouse, you're not going to draw much of your employee from the 29,000 people in Fayette County. We have a very small unemployment population, so it's not logical that you can draw 2,000 people from the population. We don't have 2,000 people out of work. But Dayton is a 40-minute drive from the interstate where the industrial park is now going to be located. Chillicothe is a 40-minute drive. Indianapolis, a 3-hour drive. So if you can draw a lot from these from the tri-state area. Cincinnati, you can drive downtown Cincinnati to our site probably in an hour and 20 minutes. And that's not a bad commute anymore. It was back in the day when we were kids. An hour away was forever. But now that's a routine drive for almost anybody. You can't get across Columbus in less than an hour. Just driving, if you drove 270 around, it's going to take you 45 minutes to an hour to get around Columbus.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So you can actually drive from Columbus to the industrial site in 35, 40 minutes. So a lot of people are going to be commuting to our community to work these various industries.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, am I correct when 71 cuts through Fayette County? Is that where the Jefferson Outlet Malls is at? Is that in your county?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've stopped there before. That seems to be an attraction for my wife.
Well, we appreciate that.
I'm sure you do. Vern, let's talk just a little bit more about you personally. What are your hobbies and interests? What keeps you busy when, we know as far as the commitment to being the sheriff, how that commitment is. But outside of that, what are you interested in?
Well, I don't usually talk about myself much. And, I suppose I can. I do. I don't like to, but I do. I'm still a shy kid. People don't believe it anymore, but I am. I don't have my interest. I don't have a lot of hobbies. Never have. Just a little bit about myself. I was so shy as a kid that my high school counselor said, "You need to do something to get out of the shell." And she somehow suggested that I become an exchange student. And I thought, that's kind of different, So I tried it. I was selected to go to Norway, and I lived in Norway between my junior and senior year. And I remember when I first got to Norway and met my family, I was so taken back by that. I lost my voice for a couple of days. But then again, I came out of my shell because of that experience. I was in the AFS program you see in schools, the American Field Service. That was an opening for me, and I'd never turned back. I still had my shell that I would kind of call into every once in a while. But I was always a social person after that. But I never got into sports. My family was never big into sports. And I was a scrawny kid. And I can remember in high school, man, Miami Trace had some awesome football players. They were big guys. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to stand out there and let them beat me up every day after school for practice. And but I did get into some character role playing from musicals and some drama, just kind of to get me some social life, because I had no social life at home because I lived in such an isolated area of the county that was my social activity, was getting involved in some school activities.
Well, that's just awesome. You know, one of my favorite parts of hosting this podcast is learning. Now you're going to be episode number 12, but just learning some things about. So far, it's been guys. So to say about guys that some I know really well, others I know a little bit. Some I haven't built a very strong relationship yet in our business as sheriffs, just because they're not maybe as affiliated with Buckeye State Sheriffs Association. We'll talk about those things. But, you know, as you went on talking about being shy and some different things of your upbringing, I'm picturing you as I know you and the roles that you have been in or are still currently in, and associations and organizations you have led. And, you know, one of the most tenured sheriffs in Ohio, people turn to you for advice and guidance, as I have, and the way you respond with your knowledge and things. And then I'm picturing you as this young, kind of sounds like maybe introverted personality or shy personality. This kind of explains it a little bit then, as you ventured into the exchange program and lived in Norway. That's really cool. And you attribute kind of bringing you out of your shell to that. I think that's pretty neat.
Well, I'm probably one of the few sheriffs in Ohio that at one time could speak Norwegian. I don't speak it anymore. I haven't had the luxury of speaking it for years. My Norwegian family, whenever we had communication, it was always in English, because they wanted to be able to speak their English rather than me speak Norwegian. But everything I've ever done has built a foundation that's led me up to today. Everything. And I've done, I haven't had any really negative things in my life. After high school, I thought I'd go to college. I tried college, and college tried me. And it was kind of a mutual understanding that I didn't finish. But, I wasn't prepared for college. I couldn't quite grasp that, the college life and the studies and so forth. I wanted to be a high school teacher. That was my desire, was to teach high school. I still have that desire. It'll never happen, but that was always my deep down desire, was to teach. And I wanted to become a lawyer. And I thought those two things would, I could do both of those things. So when I went to Morehead State University in Morehead, Kentucky, as on a whim. My SAT scores were high enough that when I applied, they welcomed me in, and but I applied late in the process. So they sent me a notice, said you need to be here next week to start, and I got in my old '68 Mustang and drove down to the hills of Kentucky, and never drove on a standard on a hillside before. That was an experience. But I did. I spent a year and a half down in Morehead. I didn't do very well. Once again, great social life. But I realized I was not college material, and I didn't have I tried to get some monies, various sources, ROTC, things like that. Didn't happen. Matter of fact, I had applied for ROTC while I was down there, and I went through the physical and found out that I had a significant hearing loss in one ear, and wasn't aware of that because it was such a gradual thing. I didn't notice it, and so I didn't. That didn't happen, and I thought, if I don't have any money. I'm paying everything myself, and I needed to come back home and get a job, and I did. When I came back from college, the next summer, I was able to get an application into a job that really has just compounded to lead me up to today.
Let's get in that a little bit and talk about your professional work experience as we get through the first part of this podcast. Tell us, if you will, a little bit about that timeline. Obviously went to a basic academy somewhere, and talk to the listeners about your professional career in law enforcement. And if you could take us up till your first election for the office of sheriff.
Well, in the summer of '76, I was hired through the local Community Action Commission, who had a youth program, and they hired me as their youth counselor. And back then, you're allowed to use the word counselor and not have a degree. But I ran one of the youth programs and had probably 50 kids that I placed throughout the community and had them work in public entities throughout the community. You know, the schools and the cemeteries, mowing grass. They worked at the state park, taking care of some of the trails and things like that. And that was a good connection. But the fact that the person that ran that program, a gentleman by the name of Fred Ross, Fred was an older man who had retired as the school clerk, and he had retired, went on to do some other things, and so he had some age on it. But Fred was my supervisor and took me under his wing and taught me so much. Even in the short time I was there, we developed a good, strong friendship that lasted the rest of his life. But I was there. When I went back to school for a part of the semester, and I came back, and I knew I had to come back and get a job, so I stopped into Fred's office, and I said, Fred, I needed it. They didn't know if you have any jobs. I know you might have one in the summer, but this was winter. And he says, I don't have anything, but let's just go see if we can find you a job somewhere. And he walked me over to the city manager's office. Walked into the city manager, and he said, I want you, you need to talk to this young man. I think you got some jobs over in the city that might be of interest. And they had a position of, which was administrator of a countywide program that was actually run by the city, but it was administrator over an employment program called CETA, CETA, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act Administrator. And the city manager said, this kid's too young to run this program. Although I like him, but he's too young. And so I didn't get the job. Next day, the city manager called and said, I want you to come back in my office. I want to talk to you again. And he came back and said, I gave this job to somebody else, but I got another job that I think you might be able to do. He said, I need an assistant building inspector to do some zoning and buildings. He said, you ever done anything like that? And I said, absolutely not. I have no idea what a zoning inspector or building inspector would do. He said, well, we'll teach you. Just come back in on Monday and we'll start you. And I started out as a building. They were just developing some subdivisions in the community, and they needed somebody just kind of keep track of things. And that was my first job with the city. The building inspector himself, we would meet at our local McDonald's. It was the brand new facility. We had a brand new McDonald's back then, which was big for us, a small community to have a McDonald's restaurant in it. And we would meet every morning at 7 o'clock with local contractors. And I would sit there, and they would decide what they wanted to do on building, and I would jot everything down on a McDonald's napkin, take it back to the office, and I would put it into on a format or on a permit form or whatever, and take it back out to the job site. I did that for about 6 months. Really liked the job. Great people I was working with, and the city manager called me in his office one day and said, "We made a mistake." He said, I fired the administrator that I'd hired to run the CETA program. He just wasn't doing the job, and I thought he could really do it. He sold me a bill of goods. And I'm going to give that job to you. You've proven yourself over the last 6 months that you can do a lot more than what we think you can do. And I was 22 years old. He gave me the job as 22 years old. He gave me the job as administrator of a federal program. I was the youngest federal program administrator in the United States at that time. And I did that program. I had 150 people working for me, did everything, administering the program, and I thought I had this made. And then, of course, the program went away, and with the change of federal programs, several programs went away, and that was one of them. The city gave me a job as an assistant, not the title, assistant superintendent of the streets, because they didn't have that title, but they gave me the job as the street superintendent, who was the same guy that was the building superintendent. And he wanted me to come over and work for him at the street department. And so I ran crews over there. And I thought that was the greatest job in the world. I mean, driving the truck around all day long, plowing snow in the winter and working on streets in the summer. And it was just a nice, easy going job. But the chief of police came out to the street department one day and he said, "Hey, Vernon, what are you doing out here?" I said, "Yeah, this is the greatest job in the world." And I met the chief while I was seat administrator, because I hired a lot of the police officers in the city, and the dispatchers were hired through the CETA program as an employment program, training program. And that's how the chief got to know me. And so every day he was coming out there and saying, "I want you to come to work for me." "Nah, I don't think so. I like being working here." "Hey, you come to work for me." Did this for about a month. And finally he said, by this time I was married, had a small child, an infant. And he says, and he laid this down financially. He said, "This is where you could be if you became chief of police someday versus being street superintendent someday." And it was just, worlds of different financially. And he said, "You need to take this job off." And I did. I finally took it, talked to my wife, and finally decided to take the position. And I joined the police department as a dispatcher. And back then you were dispatchers and jailers at the same time, same position. And the chief said, "You'll be going to the academy in the fall." And so I thought, this is a good game plan. Unfortunately, the chief, and there was a scandal within the police department. Several people were let go because of the incident. And those that remained thought that I was the snitch inside the police department that turned everybody over and did the undercover work.
Oh boy!
I was clueless. I came in there to just do a job as a dispatcher, waiting to get to go on the road. And but because of that animosity that was there, and a lot of politics in municipal police departments, more so than the sheriff's office, even today, as far as in my opinion. But because of that, I missed an opportunity to go to they jumped over me for the opportunity to go to the academy. And I didn't give up. I said, "This is where I'm going to be. I've got a future here." And I was it was a hostile work environment for the most part for the first year and a half. I kept getting, every time I come to work, I'd have a write up or just the animosity there was and the turmoil. I kept thinking I could make this better, and chose to stay. And finally was able to convince them I had nothing to do with this. And the fact came out about the investigation that led to the downfall of several people, they found out that I had nothing to do with it. And they kind of, by this time they had a new chief, very progressive chief, a smart guy, talented. And he said, he called me up one day, just about this time of year, matter of fact. And he says, this is 1985, Christmas. He called me up and said, "You're going to the academy first of the year. You need to be there on January 5th. I said, "You're not giving me any time to get prepared. I mean, I don't have anything prepared." He said, "Well, if you want to go to the academy, this is your chance." Because they had an opening, and he was putting me in that opening. And so I went to the Ohio State Patrol Academy in January of '86. I never looked back. I had a great time there. But I was in the interim time that I was as a dispatcher. I never got bored with the job. I always challenged myself as much as I could. We started a police athletic league organization and became very involved with that as a dispatcher. Became involved with the Explorer program. We started an Explorer program, became very involved with that. and never got bored with what I was doing, even though I was just a dispatcher. I even wrote I would sit in midnight shift, which I typically worked midnight shifts, and the dispatch back then was you had a pencil and a yellow pad, notepad, and you wrote down everything. We didn't have computers back then, and you transcribed your notepad you typed it onto a form by the end of your shift, and that was your radio log. And then you check on your prisoners every once in a while. Life was very simple back then. But I talked to the chief into getting us a little computer, a little Macintosh computer. They just came out with these things, and nobody knew how to do the computer. But I actually wrote a software on the midnight shift that was which was a precursor to our NIBRS reports, our reporting system we use today. Very very primitive based, but it was still comparable to what we have. And I wrote that entire system that was used well into the after probably 2006 at the city. I mean, for years they used this system until they got into the OBRS system, the Ohio-based incident report system, and NIBRS. They migrated into that successfully. But I never got bored with my job. I've always if I had to challenge myself, I would make a challenge and do it. And that was one of the challenges I did. But I went to the academy, became a peace officer certified in '86. Went on the road, and I remember at the academy, my one of my counselors at the one of the troopers. I think it was Markowski was his name, and nice guy, as a trooper can be, however nice they can be. But at the end of the academy, they bring you in for an exit interview, and they sit and talk to you, and you talk to them. And he said, "Where do you plan on being in 10 years?" And that was 1986. And I said, "In 10 years." And I mean, off the top of my head, I said, "I'll be sheriff in 10 years. And he said, "No, I want you to be serious. And where do you think you'll be in 10 years?" I said, I can be sheriff. I'm going to take on challenges. I'll do what I need to do. And he said, "But, he said, you really didn't even do a lot of leadership here." I mean, so I said, "I don't need to. I've got all the responsibility back home that I do all the time." But the off-the-cuff comment was, in 10 years, I'll be sheriff. Now, I did have a desire to be chief of police. Never really had a desire to be a police officer or a deputy sheriff or a sheriff. Never really thought that would really happen. But I really thought that someday I could work my way up in the police department and become chief.
Well, Vern, how did that work out for you through your tenure there in the police department? What was the ranks that you were able to achieve, and for how long before that first election?
Interesting enough, I came on as a police officer. I just ranked as a patrolman, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working the road, enjoyed answering calls, enjoyed interacting with the people. Back then, Washington Courthouse was divided in half, so I was still midnight shift most of my career, and so I had the north end of town and got to know my community very well. But I always, if I started getting bored, I would take on new challenges, whatever that challenge may be. Whatever was in the office. I kept taking the sergeant's exam, but because I didn't have that military bonus on there, every guy that took the test, if they had a military, they got a couple extra points than me, and I never made the sergeant's exam, and that was always disappointing. I always thought that because you couldn't become chief if you weren't at least a sergeant, and I just never made it. But I took the challenge on and got involved with crime prevention, and that was a good outlet for me. I got involved with communities through crime prevention. We established neighborhood watch groups. I just did a lot of it. Did academies. Did a lot of things to challenge myself throughout my career. And the Police Athletic League was a big program here in the community back in the 80s and the 90s. But I knew I wasn't going to make sergeant. And the last time I took the test, I passed the test, and I always passed the test, but I just got so far down, they always promoted off the list, and it was only a 2-year list. And by the time a next sergeant position came open, the test had to be re-administered. And I had, as another chief came into office, we had worked together throughout my tenure as a patrolman. And when he became chief, I was already teaching DARE, and my office, my DARE office, was actually a storage room in the garage at the behind the city building, and that's where I stored everything. That's where I did all my paperwork and so forth. And he looked at me and said, the things that I was able to accomplish with the last chief, this chief came in and said, I don't want you back in the garage. I want you up here with me. And we're going to start working on the budget. We're going to start working on different things. I became basically became his assistant. And I was doing literally everything that the chief had me do. I mean, he was just, I became his right-hand man. And even though I didn't have rank, he came in one day and he said, the captain doesn't want to be the jail administrator. But you're the only one that I think that can run the jail, the city jail, municipal jail. And he said, I'm going to give you the responsibility of being jail administrator, but I can't give you the rank. So the captain was happy to get rid of that job. And I became the jail administrator for about 3 years. And I realized if I could do this, I could do about anything. Because it was an old jail, it was an old city jail. But trying to bring it up to standard and dealing with the issues, the red tape, and all the training issues that were becoming more prevalent. I thought by the year of 1995, we had a sheriff that was a great man, a great investigator, didn't do the greatest job in the world as sheriff, and I think he knew that. He was struggling. He didn't really want the job as sheriff. He was happy with his life as an investigator, and his boss had retired for health reasons, convinced him or forced him to take the position, the appointment as sheriff. And he had this, so he had a 6-year tenure as sheriff. And I thought, I could do that job. And so I went to him and asked him if he was going to run for another term. And he was very non-committal. He said, I don't know. So I just may retire. I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, well, and I was very forthright. I said, I think I could run for sheriff, and I think I could win. I think I'd like to be sheriff. And I said, back in my mind, I knew it's not going to be police chief anytime soon. And he said, well, but to be fair with the sheriff, I told him, I said, if you're going to run, I'm not going to run, because I knew I couldn't beat him in a primary. But lo and behold, he gave no indications he was going to run. I went back to him a couple of months later and said, I'm interested in, I'm running, but I need to get an answer here. And he said, he just wouldn't commit himself. I said, well, here's what I'm going to do. If by this date you haven't announced that you're going to run for re-election, I'm going to announce that I am going to run for sheriff. The date came. He didn't announce, and so I did. And he had no indication he was going to run, so I filed for the primary. The 2 other people filed for the primary, 1996 primary. And the sheriff had no indication so we just thought he was going to retire. And he was that type, he held everything close to his chest. He was a good investigator. You didn't get anything out of him that he didn't want to give you. But unbeknownst to me, because I was outside of the sheriff's office, I was never an insider. They were having a lot of turmoil within the office. So there was a 3-way primary in 96. Day before the primary, one former deputy and another deputy filed as independents, and the sheriff was kind of upset by that, I assume, and so he filed as an independent. Now, I won the primary the next day, became the Republican candidate, and in the general election, one of the deputies withdrew before the general election, so it became a 3-way race. in November of '96, and I was successful in beating the incumbent. Although I never really felt that I beat him, because I really think he didn't want to run. And I worked hard. I did a door-to-door campaign. I met thousands of people, talked to people, and put a face to it as a candidate, and it worked. A matter of fact, I was out campaigning in a snowstorm, could barely get through, and I was knocking on doors, and they just kind of impressed people. But ironically, one of the opponents pulled up at an intersection as I was walking across, and he rolled his window down and said, "What are you doing in the storm?" I said, "I'm out campaigning." And he said, "Hey, you'll never see me out in the storm like this." And ironically, I talked to him later. He said, I never went door to door after this. I knew you won that election when you walked in front of my truck. He said, I knew that if you were that dedicated, you were going to win this election. And I did. I took office January of '96. Ironically, that was 10 years from when I graduated the State Patrol Academy. And Lieutenant Mikowski called me up, and he said, "I couldn't believe this when I read this, that you won." He came to my swearing in, and he came to several of my other swearing ins over the course of my tenure. But he was impressed by that, and that I held true to my 10 years from the academy. I became sheriff.
That's incredible. And you think about all of that you just said, Vern, so do the math for the listeners, that 96 election. How many terms have you been elected to the office of sheriff?
I just finished my 28th year as sheriff, 7 terms, and I'm just beginning my, in January 6th, begin my 8th term.
That's incredible. And then when you look across the state of Ohio, I have a list back at my desk. I've just looked at it recently that a lot of times will come to us through our association. You've got to be at the top of the list as one of the most tenured sheriffs, if not the most tenured sheriff in the state. Is that close?
Well, Holmes County Sheriff and Perry County Sheriff have 1 term more than me, and they ran for re-election, so they are going into their 9th term. They share the first place, and I share the second tenured place within the state of Ohio, along with Sheriff Heldman, who leaves. He's retiring in January, so I'll be the lone second place holder for tenure in the state of Ohio and in January.
That's fantastic. Well, Vern, let's take a break real quick and pay the bills. This podcast is sponsored by the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association. We're going to do an ad break right now. We'll come back from that ad break. We're going to get into some of your affiliations that you've had with our state agency, national agencies, and otherwise, and then we'll wrap things up with just talking about your office there in Fayette County. So we'll be back right after this break.
This podcast is sponsored by the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association. The BSSA is in Columbus, Ohio, and was established in 1931. The Buckeye State Sheriffs Association was formed to perpetuate an efficient organization of Ohio sheriffs and their deputies. BSSA provides an exchange of information pertaining to the duties, methods, and official practice of its members. The association also exerts such influence as may be necessary to bring about and preserve legislation in harmony with the needs of enforcement officials and the safety of the public. The BSSA supports the efforts of this podcast to promote Ohio sheriffs and deputies and their mission to serve and protect the citizens of Ohio.
Welcome back to the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association podcast. We're continuing with Fayette County, Ohio Sheriff Vern Stanforth. I'm Jason Landers, the sheriff in Paulding County. We're going to dive in a little bit with Sheriff Stanforth here about some affiliations. And a lot of these things I think are very intriguing to me when I look to a tenured sheriff as yourself. And I think the listeners will be kind of impressed by a lot of this as well. Let's first start off, Vern, by talking about your affiliation with our sponsor, the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association. Just talk a little bit, if you will, about over those 28 years, your affiliation with the association, your time going through the chairs of that operation and just what that association means.
Well, as I was going through my career as a police officer with the city of Washington, I became intimately involved with the Crime Prevention Association, Ohio Crime Prevention Association, ran by Domingo Jerez at that time, and I had a little bit of affiliation or some insight into what the Chiefs of Police Association was like and what the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association was like. But I was a rank and file within the office and never got really actively involved in those organizations. But when I became sheriff, I was an outsider coming in, and no, there's never been an outsider brought in as sheriff for decades and decades and decades. Probably since the 1920s, 100 years. They've always been in-house. I mean, you inherited the office, or you were anointed in the office rather than elected to the office. And I was really I had a contested like that. I had a three-way primary, a three-way general. So it was a very contested race. When I came in, I had a lot of learning, a big learning curve. And I was very fortunate that my chief deputy that I selected was a tenured member of the sheriff's office. We were high school acquaintances, and our careers kind of paralleled each other. And he was a very logical choice to make as my chief deputy. And he says the first thing you need to do, Sheriff, is you need to get in touch with all the sheriffs around us. We need to get a relationship built, and that's what he did. He took me around to the sheriffs, the adjoining county sheriffs, and one of them was Highland County Sheriff. And the Highland County Sheriff, we had a nice conversation. And he said, "Well, what are you doing next Wednesday?" I don't have any plan for next Wednesday. He said, "Well, I'm coming up to your office next Wednesday, and you need to be outside your office. I'm going to pick you up at 9:00, and we're going to go to the BSSA office in Columbus. I'm going to introduce you to Bob Cornwell, and there's a board of directors meeting up there, and you need to get affiliated with BSSA." So Tom Horace was the sheriff at Highland County, and true to his word, 9:00, he pulled up in front of the office. He said, "Let's go." And I never looked back. He introduced me to the other sheriffs. I was just so out of my element there because I was really the odd man out. I was relatively young, and I came up there, and I was these sheriffs that had been there for 20 years, so impressive, and the knowledge they had, and the immediate camaraderie that was exampled there. So I started going back to the BSSS meetings, and eventually they said, we have a board position, a board of directors, and how the structure is, and that you need to take one of these positions, and one's opening up. So I did, got on the board, enjoyed my tenure on the board, was learning a great deal along that path. You ought to run for president, and you had to go through the chairs to do that. So I ran as secretary and treasurer, and the vice presidency, and eventually became president in 2007. Great year. Enjoyed my tenure as president. I thought this was the greatest thing that could happen. And I felt I was at the peak of my career, and nothing else could top this. And as president of the association, sent you to the National Sheriffs Association conference, and I went out to Salt Lake City, I believe was the conference. And I arrived, and when I got out there, Bob Cornwell was already there, and he said, "Sheriff, they've got an opening on the board of directors for the National Sheriffs Association board. Would you be interested?" Well, I might be interested. And he's kind of laid out, this is what the involvement's going to be over the course of as a board of directors member. And I say, I can do that. And So Bob said, we'll make it happen. And we started campaigning out there at Salt Lake City. And at the end of the conference, I was elected to the board of directors in 2007. And so I was coming off my year as president of BSSA and started my tenure as board of directors in NSA. And as time progressed on the NSA, someone kept saying, you need to think about going through the chairs. That was big time politics when you start talking about running a campaign that would entail communicating with all 3,000 of the sheriff's offices around the country and trying to get a group of those guys to actually vote you in as president was a tough act. But I finally decided that maybe I need to get in the chairs. So I think it was 2015, 2016. I decided to throw my hat and run for sergeant of arms. I lost the first challenge and came back. Eventually was successful in getting elected as sergeant of arms. Over the course of the years, worked my way up through the chairs of the administration of the National Sheriffs Association. Took over as president in 2021. The president that year lost his election, and so in January he left. During his tenure as president, when you give up your sheriff's office, you no longer can be an officer within the NSA. And so he lost his sheriff's office, and therefore he lost his presidency as NSA, and I moved into that spot early. And so I had the office for about just under a year and a half as president. And that was indeed one of the greatest honors that I could ever have, is being named by my fellow sheriffs from across the country to represent them on hundreds of issues that were brought before the United States Congress, working Capitol Hill on a daily basis, actually having an office in Washington, D.C. So whenever I was in Washington, I actually had an office there that I could go to, and that was an honor. I just think that I have that ability to do that, and it was an honor doing it. And I certainly enjoyed that. But during my, I know I seem to be talking more than answering questions. I don't want to. If you have other questions, you certainly ask. But while I was in the interim of being sheriff, and more than just BSSA and NSA, because they opened the world to me again, and I always refer back to my time in Norway and the doors that it opened. And BSSA and NSA did the very same thing. I've been able to do things representing the state and do things representing the nation that I could never have done, and come from a small county. And my goal was, as sheriff in a small county, was do no harm, and make my parents proud of me, and make my family proud of me, make my community proud of me. I'd do nothing that would harm my community or my family or my reputation. And so it was an honor to be able to represent my county when I would go to Washington, D.C. as national president. And the things I did with the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association, I wanted to, I told you earlier that my goal was ultimately to become a high school teacher. I always had that hankering to teach, and also to be a lawyer. I thought, I could do both of those. And I had an example of one of the high school teachers that did that. He was a teacher, became a lawyer, and eventually became a judge. And I thought that was kind of a neat career path, but that left unfulfilled because I didn't finish college. But during the time I was sheriff and then my affiliation with BSSA. I started fulfilling a lot of that because I started getting connected to the Ohio Peace Officers Training Academy located in London. And of course, back then that was the only academy that was available other than the State Patrol Academy. But any advanced training, you go to London. And I started going up there for training. And then they started offering me an opportunity to come in as an instructor on some of the courses. And that was a tuition reimbursement type thing. I didn't get paid for it, but the agency got tuition reimbursement. So I would teach, the agency got the reimbursement, and that fulfilled that desire that I had for teaching. But that also opened some doors. And I thought, once I got involved with BSSA, Bob Cornwell called me up one day and said, "You're next door to a PATA. You're in adjoining county. Can you go over and sit in on some of the PATA commission meetings? We just need a representative to sit in there." And there's 2 representatives that actually sat on the commission by statute. The revised code and administrative code allows for 2 sheriffs to sit, 2 representatives from the chiefs, and several other people to sit on the commission. And I would go over there because if the sheriffs that were appointed to the commission either weren't there or weren't able to go, I would show up, and I would sit in the sidelines and just listen, take notes, take it back to the association. And when Betty Montgomery became Attorney General, there was an opening that another sheriff was assigned to it. A larger county sheriff was assigned to that commission. And then a short time later, she came to me and said, "I got a small sheriff vacancy. The sheriff's going to retire or going to leave the commission, and I want you to have that appointment." And so in the year, just shy of in the year 2000, I believe it was, I was asked to join the commission. And late that year, I was appointed by the governor to serve on the Ohio Peace Officers Training Commission. And once again, what an honor to be able to sit there and I to give them my all and have to craft our training throughout Ohio and how we can make that happen in the future and to make everything better. And so I had a great time from 2000, 2001 when I first got on the commission. And in 2005, there was a sequence of chairs that took place every year. They were changing the chair, and they had the chairmanship came open in 2005. I was elected by the peers of the commission to be the chair. And I've been chairman since 2005. I'm the longest tenured chairman of the Ohio Peace Officers Training Commission in the history of Ohio's training. And that in itself is also an honor. And I look at this, I humbly look at it. I know this whole conversation may sound like a brag, and I hope it's not put across as a brag to people, but it's an honor to be able to do this. And what's even a greater honor is I have the privilege of signing every certification that comes out of the Ohio Peace Officers Training Commission. So there's over 30,000 peace officers in the state of Ohio. And at this juncture, almost 20 years later as chairman, my signature is on a certificate almost of probably every peace officer in the state of Ohio that's gone through a PATA training, and almost all of them have now. So there's 30,000 certificates across the state has my signature on it. That's an honor. It's also an awesome responsibility that's been placed on my shoulders, that we train our peace officers to give them the best training at a basic level and offer them the best advanced training we can, and to be intimately involved in the crafting of Ohio's peace officer training, however that plays out over the years as it molds, as it changes, as the state legislature dictates, as the communities start dictating, and we start answering those calls of needs across our community, and how that training is going to formulate. Knowing that I'm an intricate part of that organization, the commission, and leading the commission, it's been an honor. Because of that, I've been able to fulfill that hankering down deep inside to be an instructor, to teach, although I'd never be a lawyer, it's never going to happen. But I sit among some of the greatest lawyers in the state of Ohio. I've sat on commissions that have been appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Interesting, I didn't have a good relationship with Chief Justice Moyer. I challenged him on several issues. The judge out of Madison County challenged the Chief Moyer on some issues and brought me into the fray. And I took the battle cry, and Chief Moyer was not happy with me at the end of the day. But even with that, he still appointed me to one of his commissions, the Futures Commission. And because I was an opponent to what he was doing, so he said, if you can think of something better, I'm going to put you on the commission and let you figure it out. And so I was on the finance committee of that, and we started formulating things. And so I had the opportunity to sit with some of the greatest minds, and that's at the state Supreme Court level, and the commissions and the committees that were put together by the Chief Justice, the various Chief Justices that I participated with, and that fulfilled once again that craving that I know I'll never be able to have as being a judge and practicing before a court. But I've been given those privileges, and it's because of BSSA that those doors were open.
Well, it's interesting, Vern, when you look at nearly a 40-year career in law enforcement and what you've done in the different affiliations that you've been a part of and the different positions that you've held. You should be proud of that, and it is an honor. And I can tell you from my perspective, the leadership that you had and that I hope continues through the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association because of folks like you and the folks before you and after you, the NSA, and how proud it was for us as we were able to be there at that national conference and watch you achieve that position as the president of that national association, and the way you represented not only yourself, sheriffs in Ohio and sheriffs from across the nation. It is an honor, and it is a humbling experience for you, I'm sure. And then, as people that listen to this in law enforcement understand what the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy is and what that commission is responsible for, and your role for nearly 20 years as the chair of that commission. It's I knew preparing for this interview when I wrote a couple of those notes down that it was going to take some time to hear you speak those things out, but it's so unique, I think, from people that I know, that you've achieved all of those different things and that you continue to chair that commission at OPATA. I just think it's really interesting. Anyone that can spend nearly 40 years in the profession anyway, 28 years and counting as the elected sheriff of your county, it's just fantastic. I have a few more questions for you here before we end our podcast. Vern, let's talk about this one. I think this would be great. Again, we talk about your tenure. What kind of changes have you seen in law enforcement? I made a couple notes here early on from starting as a dispatcher and pencil and paper and writing down the activity that happened, and then typing. And I think when you said typing, some folks listening to this might have never used a typewriter, but I think you're talking about typewriter your notes onto those cards that they went on. And now you look at what we have in technology. Just for a minute, if you would, talk about some changes you've seen in our profession.
Well, computerization is the biggest thing. When I started, it was so foreign. We kind of had the introduction to computers. We've always had computers since World War II. We've had some form of computers, but they just started becoming so refined. And I remember going to my first meeting as a police officer to start, and it was the introduction of the what is today we call the OBRS, the Ohio-based Incident Report System. We went to Athens, Ohio for a briefing. My chief and I went down, and we thought that's not going to happen. That's just so foreign to us. It's so complicated. We don't even have a computer in our sheriff's office, in the police department, not alone the sheriff's office. But when I became sheriff, by that time there was a lot of progress made in that field. When I became sheriff, we had the leads computer in the dispatch. Our radio communication was a local cobbled together radio system with low band frequency, unreliable. And that was one of my first challenges, was put together a better radio system. So we did that. 911 was in its infancy back then, even though we had it, but it was still basic. And we immediately brought us up to date. When I became sheriff, my first term, we did a lot of work bringing our communications, our 911 system up. And we've done nothing but advance every step of the way. We try to stay in lockstep with the advances. We're now a Marks County, which we got out of our own radio system. I don't need to make a radio system when I've got one there that's going to provide us with a much broader coverage. I had the privilege of serving under Governor Taft as the Homeland Security Advisory Board Chair for 6 years. And so that was the very formative stages of Marks. And I had one of the first Marks radios because I was chair. I had the privilege of having one of the first Marks radios, the sheriff's cruiser. And that is now the sheriff's, that even though it was designed to be a state patrol and the state, backbone of the state operation, the sheriffs have actually become the largest players within the Mark system, and that was visionary. We needed to get the sheriffs involved, and we did, and they have, and it's been a great thing. The very few sheriffs are not participating in the Mark system, but that's been a big leap forward. And when I go around the country, I talk about what we could do in Ohio with our Marks, people are just scratching their heads like, how do you do that? I said, well, but it was a great foresight that a lot of players came in to make that happen. I was very fortunate. I worked hard to get a new jail. I had an 1885 jail that I acquired when I became sheriff. I inherited and operated that up until just a few years ago when I was able to get a levy passed. One attempt, got the levy passed by the voters. We built a new jail, and now we're operating in a brand new facility that'll do this community for generations to come. But with that, we've got the state-of-the-art communication center. We got state-of-the-art jail. Our patrols, I've got some of the greatest patrol deputies, young guys that I'm thinking they weren't even born when I took office. And this new dynamic of a police officer, they have this down well, and I think that's true all across the state of Ohio. Where we need to look at these things, how they're progressing, not hold back. If the new technology comes out, body cameras, the technology involved behind that has been a godsend. Most deputies and police officers have body cameras. We see the few that get in trouble, but the vast majority, it keeps them on the straight and narrow. It keeps them, focused on doing their job and doing their job right, and that accountability is there. If those things are good things that we've seen progress over the last 28 years as I've been sheriff, and the last almost 45 years as a law enforcement officer.
Yeah, I think body cameras have been huge. I know for my staff, we deploy them in the jail and the patrol side, and most times the staff does not want to work without them. If their camera went down for some reason or another, we better have some reserves on standby because they feel a certain amount of protection with them. And, it just helps with a lot of things, including transparency in our line of work. Let's just a couple more questions for you here, Vern, before we get done. Talk just a minute, if you will, about the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. You just talked about having a new facility there. What's the size of your agency, roughly, if you would? Do you have, sounds like communications, corrections, you have patrol division, and talk about your agency for a moment.
Well, we're a full-service jail. We're a full-service sheriff's office. We do everything. Like I said, there's only one other police agency in the county. We have, as a matter of fact, we have no residential troopers in the county. That's a thing of the past. We are serviced out of the Wilmington district of the State Patrol and have a great relationship with them. The Boys Cross Police Department, very comparable in size to what we have, although they don't run a jail, so their size is basically equivalent to our patrol deputies in numbers. But when we moved out to the new jail, which is a 120-bed jail, I left a downtown facility, which was a small, like the 1885, Civil War era jail. Basically, it was built by veterans of the Civil War. I went from 9 jail staff to today. I've got about 25, 27 jail staff. Big change for us. That's a big number. I've got a dozen dispatchers that we work 24 hours, and the volume of calls we get is just off the chart. And the days of having one dispatcher working and with a yellow pad and write down notes, those days are over. Everything is now automated. You type as soon as it comes in into the system. We have 3 to 4 dispatchers working around the clock. My patrol deputies, got about 20 deputies, and that includes our detectives that are assigned within the patrol division. So in my agency, we cover 400 square miles, like typically and around the state of Ohio, the counties are typical 400 square miles. And that's the area we cover. We handle a lot of calls. Great working relationship with all of our other first responders. We did. I inherited a emergency response team, and we did crash extrications all over the state of Ohio back in the 60s and 70s. Because we had we were geographically located well, and had the foresight of our sheriff back then to develop a rescue team. And I continue to today, although it's diminished its role as our fire services became more involved with rescue. When I first started, fire services did nothing but fight fires. And their line was, if it's not smoking, don't call us. But today, our fire services do all the rescue. And I think that's true all across the state. But that's been a migration of us doing the rescue to now letting the fire services do the rescue. My guys can focus on being on patrol responsibilities when they do the crashes or do criminal investigations. So that's been a big change for us. But we're not really unique in that regard, but we are. I'm the unique part about my agency. I want to brag a little bit. I hear all across the state, all across the country, sheriffs and police departments saying they have vacancies they can't fill. They do all these fantastic recruitment plans, and they're not really getting the people come in. I don't have a backlog of applicants, but what I do have, I don't have vacancies. If we lose a deputy through attrition, whatever that may be, we find a spot and we fill it. We don't have a problem filling our positions. When I first took office, we had hundreds of applications. We don't have those anymore. That's the thing of the past as well. I have no vacancies. When I have a vacancy, it's filled right away. So I don't have any difficulty in recruiting. We actively recruit. We're contacting our colleges and different programs to make sure we We always have a resource that we can go to when we have vacancies. But it's been a good thing for us. We have a very stable staffing, not a lot of turnover in any of the three divisions. I've got career communications, I've got career corrections, and I've got career patrol. They're very comfortable where they're at, and they do a great job of where they're at. That's kind of the unique thing about my office is, I don't have the 5 or 6 ton of vacancies at any given time.
They're very unique for that, and I'm fortunate as well. I don't want to jinx myself or you, but we're up to staff, and it's always good to feel comfortable that way because we know through talking with folks throughout our associations that it's not the case across Ohio and across the country. Well, let's ask one more question. We're going to end on what I believe is the favorite for the listeners out there from my feedback as we wrap up this interview. Vern, I want to ask you, what is your passion about law enforcement? You've talked about a lot of really great things over the course of this interview, but what drives you every day? What causes you to just wake up every day and continue to serve the citizens after all of these years? How's Fayette County keep you around?
Well, I love my community, and braggingly, I hope the community they seem to like me. It's still a hometown, even though we're a growing community. We think we're going to have some significant growth, but we want to keep that hometown feel. We keep training is near and dear to me. I hope we're able to stay in that, if not as on the commission, but at least stay in the training mode for years to come, and cultivating new peace officers as we go along. I'm lucky. My current chief deputy, was one of my first Explorer groups back in the 80s. He started with me when he was 14 years old as an Explorer, and he moved in the sheriff that time when this kid was 17 years old. The sheriff came to me and said, "I need a jailer. Got anybody that's available?" And I sent him over this 17-year-old kid that was just getting ready to turn 18, and the sheriff hired him, and he's been there ever since. And when my chief retired, I looked at this kid and I said, "It's time to bring him up." He was a sergeant already. I brought him up as my chief deputy. And those are the things that we need to do as we progress ourselves in the sheriff's office, is making sure the next generation is trained up, brought up, and we give them the resources they need to make themselves successful. And I do that at every level. The challenges that I put on myself, I put on my staff, always giving them challenges. And if I'm hoping that they see the challenge that I put on myself and the benefits that it's been for me as a police officer, as a sheriff, moving through the steps of the state association, BSSA, and National Sheriffs Association, and to do an honorable job, whatever I do, to be an effective leader, but still having the compassion of a hometown boy that's trying to do good and will try to do good whatever I do. And it's so easy to do the right thing. You have to deliberately do the bad things. It's so easy when you do it the right way. And that's always been my philosophy. Let's just do it the right way. It's a lot easier. And it's worked out great.
Well, Sheriff Stanforth, I would like to thank you for being a part of today's episode. We would like to thank the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association for their sponsorship. For Sheriff Vern Stanforth, I'm Jason Landers. I'll be right back here next month featuring another Ohio sheriff or deputy on the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association podcast.
Hi, my name is Bob Cornwell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association, located in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for listening to this podcast today. It was brought to you by the Buckeye State Sheriffs Association. With this podcast, we are striving to introduce you to sheriffs and deputies from around the state of Ohio and recognize their great work they do every day for the citizens of Ohio. For more information about our organization, Google Buckeye State Sheriff. Thank you.